presenter invites his talented, the playwright, writer, and producer to tell veterans' stories. His dramatic work has been staged at the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, the Guthrie Theater, and the Library of Congress, among others. He has received a congressional commendation as well as an Emmy. His work has been supported by the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. His talk will be followed by 2 short performances by cast members from Telling Kansas City, and I've seen their performances and they're wonderful. Please welcome Jonathan Way. Break away.
So we're really going to flip it a little bit. I'm going to highlight them and speak a little bit about our work, but I really want you to see and experience it rather than listening to me talk about it. I have a couple things that I want to say before we get started. First of all, thank you for everyone who put this together. This is amazing. It's a wonderful opportunity. And what a great group of presenters and artists and veteran service organizations. It's really a privilege to be here with you today. Second of all, we are missing one of our performers. There was a slide up there. She was not able to make it today, so we have 2 of our fantastic performers, as mentioned before, from Telling Kansas City, which was here in 2015, is that correct? That's right, and we worked with KCPT there and Lindsay Fote, and that was a wonderful experience. We'd like to dedicate this performance today to one of our performers from that production. His name is Mike McGraw. He might be known to many of you. He was a longtime journalist with the Kansas City Star. He won a Pulitzer Prize with them. He was a lifelong Kansas City resident and just an amazing, wonderful, generous person who read from his father's letters, who served during World War II and wrote extensively back to his wife. He read from those letters and then also talked about his own experiences growing up the son of a war veteran from World War II. So today's performance, we would very much like to dedicate to Mike because today would have been his 70th birthday. So the American military is the most powerful human institution that has ever existed. Think about that for a second. And with that comes a lot of attention, a lot of polarization. With that comes huge opportunity and huge responsibility. With that comes the power for order, power for chaos, great power for peace and for violence, enormous power for protection and destruction. When there is a concentration of power like this, dualities will constellate. These are among them. Here's another duality. The American military serves the will of the American people. Will and execution. The people express intention, and the military acts upon that intention. We began this work in 2007, and what I mean by this work is that we work with groups of military veterans and military family members to give them training and the opportunity to tell their stories to their communities in person, as they wish to tell them. When we began this work in 2007, those dualities, but particularly that duality, intention and action, was central to the way we were thinking about this. And what we wanted to do was bring them closer together. Because what we were perceiving was that that duality was actually split between 2 populations, one of which was the civilian population and the other which was the military population. And what we wanted to create was a third space for reflection. Intention, action, and then a third place where these 2 populations, these 2 bubbles, if you will, could come together and reflect. And they would come together, ideally, and I think that oftentimes we accomplish this, not as civilians and military, but as citizens, as a group of people who have similar questions about who they are, both as individuals and as a nation, and they have something to give to one another in terms of a conversation, in terms of an interchange, in terms of thought, reflection, contemplation. So I want to leave a thought with you before we start this performance, which is this. Shakespeare called art a mirror held up to nature. And the art that we do, the nature, is all of ours. It's human nature, and it's our collective nature.
In the fall of 1974, I became a mercenary, a soldier for hire. Really? Well, that's what they told me as I walked past the student union on my way to class and was confronted by some students. They said I didn't belong there, and I represented what was wrong with the world. The kinder ones just told me that I was a prostitute and that there are better ways to earn money for college. You see, I was wearing an Army ROTC uniform on a California university campus. And in the dorms, we would talk about what we were going to do when we graduated. And I said I was going to be an Army officer. My dorm mates immediately asked how long I had to serve, as if I was a convicted criminal going to prison. Well, I told them 4 years. And they immediately asked what I was going to do when I got out, as if my service was an inconvenient interruption in my life, something to be put behind me. You see, they thought it was all about the money. They couldn't understand that anybody would want to be a soldier. I knew I wanted to be a soldier, but I didn't understand my own motivations, and I couldn't explain it to them. I was only 18, and I didn't have the wisdom or the experience to put into words what I felt in my heart. I knew I wanted to be a soldier, but didn't fully understand my own motivations. So if they thought it was about the money, I would let them believe that. Then as a young captain, nearing the end of my service obligation, I started to receive all these letters from corporate recruiters. They're telling me that they valued my leadership skills and my military experience, and that they'd pay me a top dollar salary if I signed on with them. I ignored the letters, and eventually they stopped coming. Then, as I was nearing the end of my service obligations, people would ask me, "Are you going to stay in?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Are you going to stay for the retirement?" And they asked what I would get in retirement. I said, "Well, 20 years, and I will get 50% of my active duty pay as a pension." They thought I was staying for the money. And then when the 20-year point arrived and I didn't retire, people asked me why. I said, "I love being a soldier." Some of them then teased me and pointed out that I was now working for less than half of my active duty pay. I just smiled and soldiered on. And then in 2004, I received orders to go to Iraq. Now, that posed a dilemma. At that point, I had 26 years in service. I could retire at 65% of my active pay and stay home with my wife and children. Or I could deploy to Iraq and do a third tour in a combat zone. So I called my wife, who was on a business trip, and I explained the situation to her, and she suggested that I make 2 lists, a list of reasons to go and a list of reasons to stay and retire. So I made my lists, and the next night I called her back, and I started to read from the list of why to go to Iraq. And I started off with duty, honor, and then she stopped me right there. She says, "It's okay. You don't have to read anymore. I support your decision. You can go. I understand." Now, had she asked me to retire, kept me home with her and the children, I would have. But she didn't, because she's the first person that really understood. Making those 2 lists helped me to understand my own feelings, what my soul had been telling me for years. I knew why I was a soldier. I knew why I didn't get out after my initial service obligation, why I didn't take a high-paying civilian job, why I didn't retire after 20 years, and why I agreed to go to Iraq again. See, at that point, at age 48, I had the wisdom and the experience that I had not at 18. I could put into words what my soul had been telling me. And it wasn't just duty or honor. It was much more complex than that.
January 17th, 1991. I'm in the Marine Corps, and I'm with my unit, Marine Heavy Helicopter Squadron 462 in Al Jubail, Saudi Arabia. We're there for Desert Shield. I'm on mess duty, and I'm working the 3rd shift. It's my job to prepare the white gas cook stoves that they use to make breakfast. And I'm in this area that's outside the mess hall because of the fire hazard. And I have a 150-watt light bulb in my tent to see what I'm doing. Well, that night, the gunnery sergeant in charge of the mess hall comes to me and says, "You can't have that light bulb. You need to use the little red lens on your flashlight to see what you're doing. We have to have blackout conditions." I thought about it for a second, and I said, "Gunny, it's not going to be much of a blackout if I set the tent on fire." We come to a compromise where he gave me a 40-watt light bulb, and I had to put the sides of the tent down. Later that evening, about 3 a.m., I hear this loud, low rumbling, and I walk outside, and I look up, and besides being able to see all the stars, I see these rows of aircraft headed north with the afterburners blazing. Desert Storm had started. Well, after Desert Storm starts, Saddam starts launching Scud missiles. And he usually launched them under the cover of night. One day I'm walking back to my tent, and I drop off all my gear. And I'm walking to the head, and some guys yell, "Hey, shh!" And the Scud missile flies overhead. I'm like, holy crap, I don't have my gas mask on me. So I run back to my tent, put on my gas mask, and panic. I don't know if there's sarin or anthrax on that missile. I thought I was going to die. So after about 2 or 3 minutes, I'm sitting there trying to breathe through that gas mask. I'm thinking, well, I'm not dead yet. I'm not flopping around like a fish. I guess I'm okay. But still, to this day, normally when the Scuds came, there'd be a siren, much like the tornado sirens. So when I hear that sound on the first Wednesday of every month, I'm reaching, where's my gas mask? A couple weeks later, I'm off mess duty, but I get assigned another special duty. They must have liked me. Sometimes these duties can be pretty good. You know, you could end up sitting at the pool all day. But most of the time, they just really sucked. So they have me and the sergeant, we take a ride down the port, and we get to this area that's walled off with 12-foot plywood walls and has camouflage netting over top. We walk inside, and these long, low benches about this high. They have us take a seat on them. And I notice that they're kind of an odd height to sit on, so I know that's not what they're for. And I look down, and I see these little red circles. I'm like, okay, what's going on, and why are we here? Finally, they spring the news. They tell us, the instructor comes out and says, you're in the morgue, and if your unit sees combat, you're going to get pulled to the rear, and it's going to be your job to come back after the fighting is over, to comb the battlefield for the bodies of your buddies to ship them back stateside. Me and the sergeant just kind of look at each other. So they instruct us how to prepare a body for shipment back stateside. What to do when you find live ordnance. You call the EOD team. How to locate missing body parts. You actually look for boots. They train us in all this stuff. And then afterwards they say, so, you want to see some dead Iraqis? With typical male bravado, we go, yeah, sure, they're our enemies. Let's see them. So they have this refrigerated shipping container, and they open the door. And I remember the cold air comes flooding out. And the first thing the light hits is a stack of soda pop. And some guy says, hey, you guys got cold sodas. You guys got it good. And I remember the instructor's face. He looks at the guy and he goes, yeah. So we shuffle in towards the back of the shipping container. And as my eyes adjust, I'm able to see a stack of bodies about 4 feet high stacked up like cordwood. You see, my squadron had inserted a team of SEALs that captured an oil platform. And they brought the bodies of the dead back here. So the instructor unzips his body bag and peels it back and holds his flashlight over it. And I'm looking at the guy. He said that he'd been caught behind a bulkhead when a rocket exploded and flattened his face and killed him instantly. I look at him and I think, you know, he doesn't look real. He looks like he's made out of wax. And then I look a little closer and I think, he kind of looks like this friend of mine who's a dark-complected Mexican. And then I think that thought. He's like, you know, things were different. We probably could have been friends. And it was at that moment that the reality in war and just what the fuck we were doing was made so real to me. I had to push my way out to get some air because I felt like I wanted to puke. Some guy says, hey, John, you doing okay? And I go, yeah, I'm doing all right. Because he didn't want to show any sign of weakness. So I get back to my unit and I talk to my sergeant major and ask him, why me? Why did I get the job? He goes, well, John, you're emotionally secure. And I accept that answer, but inside I'm like, holy fucking shit, dude, you do not know me. A couple weeks later, we moved further north to Tanajib, about 50 miles from the border. And we're working right next to the runway. One day I run out and pick up this piece of trash before it hits the runway. And there happens to be this Cobra attack helicopter taxiing by. And the Cobra has a system that wherever the gunner looks, that's where the Gatling gun in front points. So I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me, and I'm staring down the barrel of this massive machine gun. Flip of a switch and a click of a trigger, and I'm dead. I'm sure glad I was on his side. But all day long, I watch as these Cobra helicopters and Harrier jets take off fully loaded with ordnance. And they come back empty. And this happens again and again and again and again and again. I can't help but think we're making a hell of a lot more guys look just like him.
I stood on the free side of an Iron Curtain in Cold War Germany, in freezing mud with an M16 on my shoulder, outnumbered and outgunned facing the Soviet Red Army. And in Korea, I've looked across the DMZ and to the south. You can see lush green fields and farms and a vibrant city. But when you look to the north, all you see are hills that are as desolate as they were 70 years ago. In Bosnia and Sarajevo, I've met a young man who attempted to run the Serbian blockade of the city just to get infant formula for his newborn son. He was pinned down by Serbian machine gun fire and had to spend a freezing night until he was rescued by United Nations forces. In Iraq, in 1991 and again in 2005, I saw what one evil man can do to millions of people. And more recently, I was in Rwanda, and I saw the results of what happens when enough good men do nothing. So now I understand why in 1974 I put on a cadet's uniform and in 2008 took off a colonel's uniform. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about duty and honor. It was about protecting you from evil. Dale Eikmeier, U.S. Army.
Theodore John, United States Marine Corps.